This is a speech that Socrates made as a matter of history. In the words of Norman Melchert in his 7th edition of The Great Conversation, it is generally believed the apology was written not long after the event. Many Athenians would remember the actual speech, and it would be a poor way to vindicate Plato's master, which is the obvious intent, to put a completely different speech into Socrates' mouth. Some liberties could no doubt be allowed, but the main arguments and the general tone of the defense must surely be faithful to the original. Athenian juries were very large, in this case 501, and they combined the duties of jury and judge, as we know them by both convicting and sentencing. Obviously, it would have been virtually impossible for so large a body to discuss various penalties and decide on one. The problem was resolved rather neatly, however, by having the prosecutor, after conviction, assess the penalty he thought appropriate, followed by a counter-assessment by the defendant. The jury would then decide between the two. Thus, the apology has 3 parts. The first and major part is the main speech, followed by the counter-assessment, and finally the last words to the jury. Reading streamlined excerpts from Plato's Apology, or The Trial of Socrates. How you, O Athenians, have been affected by my accusers, I cannot tell. But I know that they almost made me forget who I was. So persuasively did they speak, and yet they have hardly uttered a word of truth. Well then, I must make my defense, and endeavor to clear away in a short time a slander which has lasted a long time. I will begin at the beginning, and ask what is the accusation which has given rise to the slander of me. Men of Athens, this reputation of mine has come of a certain sort of wisdom which I possess. If you ask me what kind of wisdom, I reply, wisdom such as may perhaps be attained by man, for to that extent I am inclined to believe that I am wise, whereas the persons of whom I was speaking have a superhuman wisdom, which I may fail to describe because I have it not myself. And he who says that I have speaks falsely, and is taking away my character. And here, O men of Athens, I must beg you not to interrupt me, even if I seem to say something extravagant, for the word which I will speak is not mine. I will refer you to a witness who is worthy of credit. That witness shall be the god of Delphi. He will tell you about my wisdom, if I have any, and of what sort it is. You must have known Chaerephon. He was early a friend of mine, and also a friend of yours, for he shared in the recent exile of the people and returned with you. Well, Chaerephon, as you know, was very impetuous in all his doings, and he went to Delphi and boldly asked the oracle to tell him whether, as I was saying, I must beg you not to interrupt, he asked the oracle to tell him whether anyone was wiser than I. And the Pythian prophetess answered that there was no man wiser. Chaerephon is dead himself, but his brother, who is in court, will confirm the truth of what I am saying. Why do I mention this? Because I am going to explain to you why I have such an evil name. When I heard the answer, I said to myself, what can the god mean? And what is the interpretation of this riddle? For I know that I have no wisdom, small or great. What then can he mean when he says that I am the wisest of men? And yet he is a god and cannot lie. That would be against his nature. After long consideration, I thought of a method of trying the question. I reflected that if I could only find a man wiser than myself, then I might go to the god with a refutation in my hand. I should say to him, here is a man who is wiser than I am, but you said that I was the wisest. Accordingly, I went to one who had the reputation of wisdom and observed him. His name I need not mention. He was a politician whom I selected for an examination. And the result was as follows. When I began to talk with him, I could not help thinking that he was not really wise, although he was thought wise by many, and still wiser by himself. And thereupon I tried to explain to him that he thought himself wise, but was not really wise. And the consequence was that he hated me, and his enmity was shared by several who were present and heard me. So I left him, saying to myself as I went away, well, although I do not suppose that either of us knows anything really beautiful and good, I am better off than he is, for he knows nothing and thinks that he knows. I neither know nor think that I know. In this latter particular, then, I seem to have slightly the advantage of him. Then I went to another who had still higher pretensions of wisdom, and my conclusion was exactly the same. Whereupon I made another enemy of him and of many others beside him. Then I went to one man after another, being not unconscious of the enmity which I provoked, and I lamented and feared this. But necessity was laid upon me. The word of God, I thought, ought to be considered first. And I said to myself, go I must to all who appear to know, and find out the meaning of the oracle. And I swear to you, Athenians, by the dog I swear, for I must tell you the truth, the result of my mission was this. I found that the men most in repute were all but the most foolish, and that others less esteemed were really wiser and better. I will tell you the tale of my wanderings, and of the Herculean labors, as I may call them, which I endured only to find at last the oracle irrefutable. After the politicians I went to the poets, tragic, dithyrambic, and all sorts. And there I said to myself, you will be instantly detected. Now you will find out that you are more ignorant than they are. Accordingly, I took some of the most elaborate passages in their own writings and asked what was the meaning of them, thinking that they would teach me something. Will you believe me? I am almost ashamed to confess the truth, but I must say that there is hardly a person present who would not have talked better about their poetry than they did themselves. Then I knew that not by wisdom do poets write, but by a sort of genius and inspiration. They are like diviners and soothsayers, who also say many fine things, but do not understand the meaning of them. The poets appeared to me to be much in the same case, and I further observed that upon the strength of their poetry, they believed themselves to be the wisest of men in other things in which they were not wise. So I departed, conceiving myself to be the superior to them for the same reason that I was superior to the politicians. At last I went to the artisans, for I was conscious that I knew nothing at all, as I may say, and I was sure that they knew many fine things, and here I was not mistaken, for they did know many things of which I was ignorant, and in this they certainly were wiser than I was. But I observed that even the good artisans fell into the same error as the poets. Because they were good workmen, they thought that they also knew all sorts of high matters, and this defect in them overshadowed their wisdom. And therefore I asked myself on behalf of the oracle whether I would like to be as I was, neither having their knowledge nor their ignorance, or like them in both. And I made answer to myself and to the oracle that I was better off as I was. This inquisition has led to my having many enemies of the worst and most dangerous kind, and has given occasion also to many calumnies. And I am called wise, for my hearers always imagine that I myself possess the wisdom which I find wanting in others, but the truth is, O men of Athens, that God only is wise, and by his answer he intends to show that the wisdom of men is worth little or nothing. He is not speaking of Socrates, he is only using my name as a way of illustration, as if he said, he, O men, is the wisest who, like Socrates, knows that his wisdom is in truth worth nothing. And so I go about the world obedient to the God, and search and make inquiry into the wisdom of anyone, whether citizen or stranger, who appears to be wise. And if he is not wise, then in vindication of the oracle I show him that he is not wise. And my occupation quite absorbs me, and I have no time to give either to any public matters of interest or to any concern of my own, but I am in utter poverty by reason of my devotion to the God. There's another thing. Young men of the richer classes, who have not much to do, come about me of their own accord. They like to hear the pretenders examined, and they often imitate me, and proceed to examine others. There are plenty of persons, as they quickly discover, who think that they know something, but really know little or nothing. And then those who are examined by them, instead of being angry with themselves, are angry with me. This confounded Socrates, they say, this villainous misleader of youth. And then if somebody asks them why, what evil does he practice or teach, they do not know and cannot tell. But in order that they may not appear to be at a loss, they repeat the ready-made charges which are used against all philosophers about teaching things up in the clouds and under the earth, and having no gods, and making the worse appear the better cause. For they do not like to confess that their pretense of knowledge has been detected, which is the truth. Strange indeed would be my conduct, O men of Athens, if I who, when I was ordered by the generals whom you chose to command me at Potidaea, Amphipolis, and Delium, remained where they placed me, like any other man facing death, if now, when, as I conceive and imagine, God orders me to fulfill the philosopher's mission of searching into myself and other men, I were to desert my post through fear of death, or any other fear, that would indeed be strange, and I might justly be arraigned in court for denying the existence of the gods, if I disobeyed the oracle because I was afraid of death, fancying that I was wise when I was not wise. For the fear of death is indeed the pretense of wisdom, and not real wisdom, being a pretense of knowing the unknown. If you say to me, Socrates, this time we will not mind, and you shall be let off, but upon one condition, that you are not to inquire and speculate in this way any more, and that if you are caught doing so again, you shall die. If this was the condition on which you let me go, I should reply, Men of Athens, I honor and love you, but I shall obey God rather than you. And while I have life and strength, I shall never cease from the practice and teaching of philosophy, exhorting anyone whom I meet, and saying to him after my manner, You, my friend, a citizen of the great and mighty and wise city of Athens, are you not ashamed of heaping up the greatest amount of money and honor and reputation, and caring so little about wisdom and truth and the greatest improvement of the soul? I believe that no greater good has ever happened in the state than my service to the God. I tell you that virtue is not given by money, but that from virtue comes money and every other good of man, public as well as private. This is my teaching. And if this is the doctrine which corrupts the youth, I am a mischievous person. And now, Athenians, I am not going to argue for my own sake, as you may think, but for yours, that you may not sin against the God by condemning me, who am his gift to you. I am that gadfly which God has attached to the state, and all day long, in all places, am always fastening upon you, arousing and persuading and reproaching you. You will not easily find another like me, and therefore I would advise you to spare me. Throughout my life, both in private and public, I have always been the same, and have never yielded unjustly to anyone. I was never anyone's teacher. I have never withheld myself from anyone, young or old, who was anxious to hear me discuss while I was making my investigation. Neither do I discuss for payment and refuse to discuss without payment. I am ready to ask questions of rich and poor alike, and if any man wishes to answer me and then listen to what I say, he may. Now, in trials like this, it was not uncommon for the defendant to attempt to appeal to the jury's pity. Some would, for example, beg and implore the jury with tears in their eyes, bring out their children and friends and family, who would then plead that the court would have pity so that the judgment would be less severe. Socrates would have no part in this because he recognized rightly that the appeal to pity is actually a fallacious appeal. At this point in the trial, the vote is taken, and Socrates is found to be guilty by 281 votes to 220. After the verdict of guilty was rendered, Socrates was given the option to suggest what he thought to be a fair punishment. Humorous as he was, he supposes, well, what would such a man as he deserve? A man who was the gadfly of Athens, who continually reminded Athens to keep their perspective in check, to remember that they don't know as much as they think they know? What would be the penalty for beseeching Athens to seek wisdom? He decides, nothing is more suitable, gentlemen, than for such a man to be fed in the Prytaneum or the cafeteria. If I must make a just assessment of what I deserve, I assess it as this: free meals in the Prytaneum. Knowing, of course, that this will not be acceptable to them, he replies, there are many reasons why I am not grieved. I cannot convince you. The time has been too short. I cannot in a moment refute great slanderers. Someone will say, yes, Socrates, but can you not hold your tongue, and then you may go into a foreign city and no one will interfere with you? Now, I have great difficulty in making you understand my answer to this, for if I tell you that to do as you say would be a disobedience to the God, and therefore I cannot hold my tongue, you will not believe that I am serious. And if I say again that daily to discourse about virtue and of those other things about which you hear me examining myself and others is the greatest good of man, and that the unexamined life is not worth living, you are still less likely to believe me. Yes, I say what is true, although a thing of which it is hard for me to persuade you. Also, I have never been accustomed to think that I deserve to suffer any harm. Money I have none. Well, perhaps I could afford a mina, and therefore I propose that penalty. Plato, Crito, Critobulus, and Apollodorus, my friends here, bid me say 30 minae, and they will be the sureties. Let 30 minae be the penalty. At this point there is a second vote, and the jury decides for the death penalty by a vote of 360 to 141. Socrates responds, not much time will be gained, O Athenians, in return for the evil name which you will get from the detractors of the city, who will say that you killed Socrates, a wise man. For they will call me wise, even although I am not wise, when they want to reproach you. If you had waited a little while, your desire would have been fulfilled in the course of nature, for I am far advanced in years, as you may perceive, and not far from death. The difficulty, my friends, is not to avoid death, but to avoid unrighteousness, for that runs faster than death. And now I depart hence condemned by you to suffer the penalty of death. They too go their ways, condemned by the truth to suffer the penalty of villainy and wrong. And I must abide by my award. Let them abide by theirs. Let us reflect in another way, and we shall see that there is great reason to hope that death is good. For one of two things. Either death is a state of nothingness and utter unconsciousness, or, as men say, there is a change and migration of the soul from this world to another. Now, if you suppose that there is no consciousness, but a sleep, death will be an unspeakable gain. Now, if death be of such a nature, I say that to die is gain, for eternity is then only a single night. But if death is the journey to another place, and there, as men say, all the dead abide, what good, O my friends and judges, can be greater than this? If indeed, when the pilgrim arrives in the world below, he is delivered from the professors of justice in this world, and finds the true judges who are said to give judgment there, and other sons of God who were righteous in their own life, that pilgrimage will be worth making. Nay, if this be true, let me die again and again. Above all, I shall then be able to continue my search into true and false knowledge, as in this world, so also in the next. And I shall find out who is wise, and who pretends to be wise, and is not. Wherefore, O judges, be of good cheer about death, and know of a certainty that no evil can happen to a good man, either in life or after death. He and his are not neglected by the gods. But I see clearly that the time has arrived when it was better for me to die and be released from trouble. Still, I have a favor to ask. When my sons are grown up, I would ask of you, O my friends, to punish them, and I would have you trouble them, as I have troubled you. If they seem to care about riches or anything more than about virtue, or if they pretend to be something when they are really nothing, then reprove them as I have reproved you, for not caring about that for which they ought to care, and thinking that they are something when they are really nothing. If you do this, both I and my sons will have received justice at your hands. The hour of departure has arrived, and we go our ways, I to die and you to live. Which is better, God only knows.